Welcome to Friday afternoon at the 2024 Annual Conference and Book Fair in Kansas City, Missouri. I am Michelle Morano, a member of the AWP Board of Directors. I am a writer who lives in Chicago and teaches at DePaul University. Here is a visual description of myself. I am a white woman wearing a purple dress with a white scarf. And I just want to welcome everyone and introduce this wonderful panel. The Association of Writers and Writing Programs, as you know, is a small but mighty nonprofit organization that amplifies the voices of writers and the academic programs and organizations that serve them, all while championing diversity and excellence in creative writing. I am a member of AWP's Board of Directors, but first and foremost, I'm a member of AWP. Membership with AWP provides me with writing resources year-round, but just as importantly, it allows me to support other writers, especially those who are just starting out. My membership dues help writers find meaningful careers and publication opportunities and make services like the Writer-to-Writer Mentorship Program and the AWP HBCU Fellowship Program possible. If you aren't already, I invite you to become a member today. We are delighted to bring you this event today. I'd like to acknowledge and thank all of our conference sponsors and the literary partner hosting this event, Copper Canyon Press. Our literary partners and sponsors allow AWP to present these extraordinary literary events and help us keep our conference affordable and accessible. Please join me in thanking all of our conference sponsors and partners for their support and participation. Before we start, I do need to do some brief housekeeping. Please silence your cell phones. Remember, there is no flash photography allowed during the presentation. Respect seats marked as reserved for attendees with accessibility needs. Please give the authors about 10 minutes after the presentation to get the books to the book signing table before approaching them to have your book signed. Lastly, we ask that you please be aware of your fellow attendees who may have disabilities and help AWP be more accessible. Specifically, if you see a barrier to accessibility, let us know by calling or texting our accessibility hotline at 240-269-6635. This number is located on the back of your badge. Please also be aware of those with invisible disabilities and do not question someone's use of an accommodation. Thank you, and now it's my great pleasure and honor to welcome Erin Belieu, who will introduce this fantastic event.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to our celebration of personal best, makers on their poems that matter most, and we're going to be talking about the ways poets create their canons with their own work. I'll be moderating today. We have this lovely, beautiful panel of amazing writers here who I'm going to introduce up top, and we're going to go alphabetically backwards so as not to oppress Eduardo, who, you know, if you're at the front of the alphabet, you know what we're talking about. So I'm just going to do these brief introductions and then turn it over to our first guest star, Adrian Matejka. Okay. First, we have Eduardo Corral, who is the son of Mexican immigrants. He's the author of Guillotine from Grey Wolf Press and Slow Lightning, which won the 2011 Yale Series of Younger Poets competition. He's the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship, a Lannan Foundation Literary Fellowship, a Whiting Award, a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, and a Hodder Fellowship from Princeton University. He teaches in the MFA program at North Carolina State for the last minute. Let's see. We also have today with us Jennifer Foerster, who's the author of 3 books of poetry, Leaving Tulsa, Bright Raft and the Afterweather, and The Maybe Bird. She has been the recipient of an NEA Creative Writing Fellowship and a Lannan Foundation Residency Fellowship and a Wallace Stegner Fellowship at Stanford University. A member of the Muscogee Nation, she lives in San Francisco. Next we have, where'd you go? Dana, oh, Sorry, Dana. Your picture is basically your head exploding, so I didn't recognize you. Dana Levin, whose head is exploding, is the author of 5 books, including Now Do You Know Where We Are, which is a New York Times Editor's Choice. A Guggenheim Fellow, Levin serves as Distinguished Writer in Residence at Maryville University in St. Louis. And, gotta find Adrian, here he is. And Adrian Matejka is the author of 7 books, including a mixed media collection inspired by Funkadelic, Standing on the Verge and Maggot Brain from Third Man Books, a collection of poems, Somebody Else Sold the World from Penguin in 2021, which was a finalist for the 2022 UNT Rilke Prize, and the graphic novel Last on His Feet from Liverwrite. He lives in Chicago and is the editor of Poetry Magazine. So, Adrian, let's welcome Adrian Matejka.
Peace, Kansas City. It is so good to see you and to be here in fellowship. Thank you, Erin. Carl, wherever you're at, thank you for the work you did, both of you, to put this anthology together, and gratitude to Copper Canyon for making it possible. So I'm going to just say a few things about writing and about the process of this, and then I'm going to move out of the way because I'm much more interested in the things that are going to be said after me than that. So I'll talk a little bit. I'm going to read 4 poems. If you know anything about the work I do, it never goes past a page, so they're very short, a lot of short boys. And then we'll go on to the next in reverse alphabetical order. Nothing happening over here. Where's Sophie? Oh. All right. And also Sophie's up here, who's everybody's actual favorite panelist. So when I was thinking about, we were talking about Canon, and it's such a complicated phrase, a complicated word to think about how we might build out a world of poetry that is exclusively ours after being given one that had nothing to do with a lot of us. I think about the ways that I learned to read poetry through Robert Frost and T.S. Eliot, and it's starting to sound exactly like it was all white guys, and that's what I got. And then I heard Langston Hughes, and I heard Gwendolyn Brooks, and I realized there was a different thing. So when I think about my own work, I hope what I'm doing inside of the writing as I move through it is trying to find a way to share with you the people who've inspired me so much. I mean, as a reader, I love it when people share their, they sort of tattoo the people who've inspired them upon the poems, right? If you read somebody, you're like, oh, clearly this person was reading Yusef Komunyakaa. I love that. Because if I didn't know who that was, then I would go back and learn who that was. You see what I mean? And all I was given mostly when I was coming up was, oh, this person has clearly read Walt Whitman, and clearly read T.S. Eliot, and clearly read, Robert Duncan. But what I want to see is people who've clearly read Gwendolyn Brooks, and clearly read Terrence Hayes, and clearly read Robert Hayden and, Lucille Clifton. So in this book, there's an essay that's about that I'm not going to bore you by reading, but I hope you'll read it. And I'm thinking about the ways in which I can offer my own lineage, not as a canon, but as an opportunity to learn about things that you might not have known about before that. And so as I was trying to build this out, I was thinking about the word best and how it implies a kind of sophistication, but it also implies a kind of hierarchy, which is how I was gifted poems. And I should say this too, I think Erin's heard this story before, but when I was in high school, we had one lesson about poetry. And the teacher who was supposed to teach it to us said, you knuckleheads won't understand this, so we're gonna read song lyrics instead of poems. And so I never studied poetry until I was in college. And I was only interested in it because I walked into a coffee shop and heard Yusef Komunyakaa reading. I had no idea what I'd walked into. So imagine that. The one chance I had to be able to learn about poetry, we studied George Michael lyrics instead of poems. And I had to discover it by accident in a coffee shop in Bloomington, Indiana. And then I realized I'd wanted to be a rapper, and that's poetry too. I wrote song lyrics for a band, and that's poetry too. But the teacher who approached it that way dismissed everything that you need to understand before you can get to that, right? So best for me is it implies something different, something more hierarchical, but not in a bad way. and it also implies clarity of intention. And so I was trying to think about what connected the poems that I chose to share with you, both in the Personal Best Anthology, what I'm going to read today, and all of them are heavy musically, all of them are heavy imagistically, and all of them have a kind of narrative. Those are the things that matter to me. So if I'm thinking about my personal best, it's when all of those come together, when everything can be there at the same time. And I'm going to read a poem that I wrote in 2005. I'm going to read two very short sonnets that speak to each other that I wrote in 2013. And then I'm going to read the poem from the anthology that I wrote around 2013 too. So for me, there's also this kind of milestones of, oh, wait a minute, I think I figured something else out. You know, I figured out a new way to make music, I think. Yeah, and so that's my personal best, is when I sound like I'm singing as opposed to reading a poem, maybe. All right. I think that's probably enough. So the first poem I'm going to read is from a book called Mixology, and I never thought anybody would ever see it because it felt to me very encoded in a way, full of the kind of culture that didn't get taught in class at the time. But the poem I want to read is inspired by one of the first British poets who I got interested in, and that was Philip Larkin. And he has this poem, This Be the Verse, maybe some people have read. It still holds up. It starts out, they fuck you up, your mom and dad. They don't mean to, but they do. So I wrote this when I was a new parent. This be the verse. And it's got an epigraph from Radiohead. This is the 21st century. This is the skin they put me in, my mom and dad, remixed melanin oleo for the asthmatic and colorblind. See how it bronzes on command. See how my hybrided daughter looks darker while she's on the beach with me. If my skin was a chicken wing, I'd lick my eyebrows before code switching inflections. If my skin were a woman, I'd check my leopard print steering wheel at the door. I'd transform my crust of rust and sea salt into something more 21st century. Borges said, things belong to the past quite quickly, so I'd throw some butane on my funk transistors and face paint my brown Band-Aid convocation and throw my sweaty Free South Africa muscle shirt to the crowd at the recycling bin. I'd leave it to the beautiful and fabulous to ID the magical backspin of skin. So when I wrote that, I felt like I'd started to figure out a different radio station from the poems I was writing before that, if it makes sense. So there was the music. These two really short sonnets I'm going to read are both inspired by one of my other favorite poets, Emily Dickinson, who I never met until I was like a senior in college. And when I did, I found her work in the frame it was meant to be made. So if you've ever seen, there's a book called The Gorgeous Nothings, where you can see how she wrote the poems as opposed to how they were given to us. And so when I saw that they were actually like these sort of little graphic novels on the back of envelopes, that was it. It was over for me. So these two poems, one is called Basketball, featuring Isaac Newton and EPMD, who's a rap group from the 80s. And the other one is Emily Dickinson, featuring Basketball and EPMD. And they're friends. Basketball, featuring Isaac Newton and EPMD. I'm sorry. This is a true story. I dunked one time. It's a really important part. It's the most important thing about the poem. I did it. I dunked one time. Basketball, featuring Isaac Newton and EPMD. I split every bit of sunlight at College Park's ball court, land of sweaty Reebok tees and patriotic wristbands, escalating to the rim like every player on that court would do to the Lafayette Square Mall mezzanine on weekends. Every bit of tangled shine around my neck, a hypotenuse of intentions. Highlights are the only lights in this low-rise space of sneaker to shin and elbow to crown. The only time I dunked, the court exploded like a party hearing You Gots to Chill for the first time. And when the smoke cleared, I hung as tight as a sweaty headband on that rim, talking smack to the other 9 ballers and to their 9 mamas. Then the slipping and cracking, then 2 months left handing jumpers, one handing prom photos, smudged scribbles on my cast while the basketball rotated as insistently as that back-spinning apple that split Newton's wig. So the one time I dunked, I was hanging on the rim. So if I need to decode this, and fell and put my hand down and broke my wrist. So I had to go to prom with like one long tuxedo arm and one short one. It was not a good look. All right. This one's called Emily Dickinson, featuring Basketball and EPMD. Business as Usual is an EPMD record, and that gets mentioned. I read poetry out here, spindling the spindles of happenstance, its M-dashery like the closed eye of a winking man used for a record needle. I love it when the laces of my suede kicks come undone like the best laid plans, and when I crouch to tie those boys up, I love shaving the side glory of my girl's skirted knee. Their stitched hem branching like the feathered stems in a blue boa she would never wear. There are too many boas in this world, and the first feathers in their garish elegance, America, home of lovers and EPMD breaking car speakers like high school curfews since 1988, someplace when I loved summer, the dash from one hoop to another, a stray kitten chewing on the moth in the bleachers in Zionsville before we fed him a hamburger, and somebody's business as usual cassette, untangling bit by bit like laughs. I did find a cat. I found a kitten at the basketball court and brought him home, and he lived in my dad's garage for 15 years. His name was Malcolm, and he weighed 26 pounds. When I met him, he was eating a moth. All right, so this is the last one I'm going to read, and thank you all for listening. I appreciate it. This is called On the B-Side. And in it, there's a reference to a Twilight Zone episode. I mean, I'm 52, so this is the kind of stuff that I get excited about. Twilight episode, David Bowie's in here, Prince is in here somewhere. On the B-side. The song ends because the beginning doesn't jumpstart again. Red smudge of a mouth, lipstick all over the place like the afterthought a comet leaves on its way out. What makes this moment unfold like a woman raising herself up from an unfamiliar couch? Honky-tonk in the blue eye of a honey, perfume in its circus of heart-shaped introductions. Innuendos always stumble in the lead-in like a man pawing around for his busted spectacles after waking up in the world's stubble. Hand over hand he paws through guitar picks and record changes, busted gut strings and clothing strung with familiar vibrato outside the window. He could be Bowie himself, exhausted by skyscrapers cracked in the aftermath of a smile. His eyes aren't different colors, they just have different focuses. He could be a whole lot of nothing, thin in hair, low change in his right pocket jingling down the stairs. He was given all of it and stole the best of the rest. Even without glasses, he sees her nearly dressed, 33rd and 1/2 RPMs, staticky in the lead-out's harmony. Thanks, everybody.
Can you hear me? Excellent. So our instructions for this reading were to read the poem that's in the anthology and then read some others that you were thinking about. But my process, which is often my process with all sorts of things, is I just kind of go with the first thing that comes into my head. And then, that becomes like a process of discovery, because why did this pop into my head for this assignment? So what I'm going to do is, and maybe this will also give you a little flavor of the book, I'm going to read some excerpts from my essay because they're in direct relationship to the poem in a reflexive process way. And then I'm going to read the poem, and then I'm going to go back to the essay. And it was interesting because here we are in 2024, and the poem that popped into my head is in a book that I published in 2005. So I was really interested in, why didn't I pick something from my latest book, Because that's not what the muse said. So, and the other thing, before I read the essay, is that the last two lines of this poem say, "You must be your own absence with 50% deity. You must ask, why this song, this seeing?" I don't remember writing this poem, but I do recognize the signs that it's a pied beauty, orchestrated in my favorite mode. Language cobbed from dream records, jotted hypnagogics, journal notes, scribbles on scrap paper that likely had an old poem draft, a page from a student paper from a long-gone semester on the back. I do remember it was a response to an assignment, circa 2003, from the American Poetry Review to describe my studio, which in truth at the time was also my bedroom slash living room slash dining room slash old converted horse stable, which I later discovered had no foundation under the brick floor. Sitting in my one chair, a ratty thing from Pier 1 Imports, remember that, RIP, I noodled the assignment, how to describe, I thought, the poet's studio. I do remember scribbling, method, method, what do you want of me? The start of a famous quote by French symbolist Jules Laforgue, which finishes, "You know very well that I have eaten the fruit of the unconscious." The assignment of this anthology is, write about what poem of yours, poet, matters most. Assignment makes me think of teaching, and indeed this poem is an exegesis on, a set of instructions for, a series of examples of. It is odd, mystic, teacherly, and emphatic. In this, it is a self-portrait. I didn't choose this poem for the anthology. I read the anthology's assignment, and this poem popped into my head. For efficiency's sake and psychological relief, I make all kinds of decisions this way. It's preferable to agonizing over choice, with its shadow companion, mistake. And while I cannot attest to this poem's bestness, I can attest to what makes it personal. The last couplet is a living ars poetica for me, a personal writing ethic. You must be your own absence with 50% deity. You must ask, why this song, this seeing? This poem is called Working Methods, and it's in my second book, Wedding Day. It's divided up into 4 sections: listening, playing, watching, making. And it features a friend of mine named Dan, who is a poet and at the time was deeply, deeply studying and practicing Kung Fu. So that influences what happened between us in this poem. Working methods. Listening. I was falling asleep, wondering how to describe the poet's studio when a voice said, "You have to be your own absence with 50% deity." Woke up with, I false into arrangement, am out of it, deranged. Woke up with, hurry up is flamboyant and resolutional. Woke up with, as the ask progresses to a tiny, new yes. My friend Dan says, listen, record, orchestrate. Playing. I was telling Dan that sometimes I get directions or lines for a poem by doodling, like how the line in a poem Isolato that goes, isolato with a crown, isolato with a barge, comes from writing the word isolato and putting a box around it and doodling around the box until one edge of it elongated into a tall thing wearing a crown-looking thing, and the whole box looked like that thing on a barge. He wanted to try it, so I said, give me a word. And he said, Jang Quan. I said, what's that? And he said, heel palm. And I knew it was a kung fu move. So I wrote Jang Quan and put a box around it, and we each started doodling and writing commentary on each other's doodling and on each other's commentary, and did some cutting. And here is the poem, which by the way is no masterpiece. Jang Quan, heel palm. Like a tack, thunder defines the cloud, hand splaying, the fletching of an arrow. But the technique was not an arrow, hand, or foot, was not an asking of what was next. The bent cherry shedding light above the flat and empty ground. Watching. When the poem begins, a curtain draws back. There is a stage for the mind's Moulin Rouge, where the image gets its aria. Pull the curtain, severed foot in a daisied green. Pull the curtain, anatomical heart of fortified city. In the panopticon, a throat in flames. The eye swoops back, swoops in. Making. Dream, a test for my beginning poetry workshop. On a page is the barest outline of a fish, and the instructions say, now draw a more serious fish. Dream, a poem hangs in the air like a curtain. It dismantles itself until all that remains are single words. They shimmer, nouns and verbs. You must be your own absence with 50% deity. You must ask, why this song, this seeing? Now let me tell you, I don't think any anthologist would ever pick this poem to be in an anthology, unless it's like an anthology of strange collaged poems that are, teacherly. But, I'm like, okay, why is this the poem that popped into my head, right? So here's what I came up with. Because working methods popped into my head in answer to this anthology's call, I have to ask, why this song, this seeing? Because in its making, it surprised me? Shouldn't every poem you write offer you bits of revelation? Because the methods it offers are implicit stays against self-protection, stays against the voice of doubt and should, the voice egging you on to control and direct and be certain so no one can tear the poem apart? But lively poems aren't creatures born of safety. Because the poem was entirely delivered, bits of language and thought and image calling out from diverse sources, their transformations just beginning. Maybe this is why this poem said, pick me for this anthology, to offer up a way to write, to think, and live. What are poems for anyway? To me, personal best arises out of the nexus of beauty, discovery, and aid. I don't know any other way to traverse this crap paradise of this world than to treat everything that happens in it as an opportunity to learn something. You must be open and asking, willingly unwilled. This is my mission and evangel. This poem matters most because it is a guide. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you, Adrian, and Eduardo, and Erin, and all of you for being here and listening. I'm just going to start by reading the poem in this anthology, which I've already started using in some classes, and it's really good. The anthology, not the poem. I'm working on that, okay. This is called The Last Kingdom, and then I'll talk a little bit about it afterwards. 3 days before the hurricane, a woman in white is hauling milk. The beach wails. She is swinging her pail. I am sleeping in a tent of car parts, quilts, when the woman passes through the heavy felt door. If your dream were to wash over the village, she says, we listen, seagulls resisting the shore. Hermit crabs scuttle under tin. The children hitch their sails in. Later that night, from the compound walls, I see her hitchhiking the stars' tar road. Black dress, black boots, black bonnet, a moon-faced baby in a basket. Thus, alone, I have conceived. A tent dweller moved to the earth's edge. I bathe in acidic waves. Everyone in the village watches at the cliff the tidal wave breach roll across the sky. They are feasting on cold fried chicken, champagne. I have no dancing dress for the picnic. The king dozes in his gravelly castle. The band plays its tired refrain. Men, drunk, on loosened wind raise their cups to mechanical dolphins tearing through the sheet metal sea. In the shadow of petrel's snowy specters, drifting monuments crash and calve. But I, as water under wind does, I tear my hair, scalp the sand. The sun, eclipsed by dark contractions, turns its disk to night. Fish like bright coins flip from my hand. Waking, I find I am alone in the kingdom. The moon lays upon me its phosphorescent veil, the floating world luciferous, bleached coral coliseum, a mermaid's molten gown. She turns her widening wheels, spills her pail of glacial milk. I could almost swim forever to her beat of frozen bells. But a sheet of water doesn't travel with the wave. And the morning, like a tender body, slides out of silt. I press against its damp, rough surface, an ear. So poetry for me is a language of translation. It's a translation of the invisible and the ineffable into words, not just words, but shaped text. Writing poems for me is an attempt to create through language an experience of something invisible, an experience of something I can see internally, but like a dream, can't exactly describe. This poem began with an inciting image, the remnant of a dream, the clearest of a set of murky images I awoke with one day. A woman on a beach with a pail at the advent of a storm. The heart of the inciting image was, for me, a solitary woman on the beach who knew what was coming when the rulers of the world refused to see. She was intentional with that pail. She was someone who worked humbly and carried the secrets. She became, in my reconstruction of the dream material, the village seer. Following this arrived a few images, each identifiable by a noun: milk, a tent, an iceberg, and a king. Now I had enough to begin. A few intriguing images or objects can be a sturdy foundation for any poem, especially if the objects or images are unusual. The imagination has no choice but to wake up when you ask, what does milk have to do with an iceberg, a storm with a tent, a king with a beach? So once I had the primary constellation of characters and images, the next rules I applied to the creative process were those of sound. The narratives suggested by the image constellation may not yet make sense, but creating musicality could invite a different kind of sense to the scene. By composing this poem according to sound, I discovered more of the poem's imaginative material. Coming up with a word to rhyme with champagne inspired the idea of a band playing a refrain, which introduced a kind of circular madness to the scenario. Cold fried chicken and champagne came from a conversation with a friend about their favorite meal, something I'd then written in my notebook because I liked how it sounded. I often mine my notebook for things that resonate with poems I'm working on, and the frivolous feast of a lazy king seemed the right home for this phrase. Sound and image, these are the primary things that guide my writing. Idea is not. If I think I know what I want to say, or if I have an argument I want to make, I won't be listening to the poem. I won't be listening to the subconsciousness or intuition that is the poem's own knowing, a knowing that is beyond my rational or intellectual mind. If I want to make a particular point, or even if I want to express some reality or a story of myself or my identity, I will lose the way. I will miss the deep connections that this intuition is revealing to me. The way of the poem demands a listening which is beyond my own designs. It's also very interesting to listen from here, which maybe some of you know. I can hear my voice, but I can hear the echo, and there's a slight pause. So it's like this very strange disembodied sense of sound, which feels like a poem. So I also think poetry can generate a distinct form of seeing, a seeing which is insight, a seeing of the invisible. And I think poetry can enact this kind of seeing through a device that I like to think of or call the invisible image. And it's invisibility, invisible. The invisible image, in my approximation of it, is neither a representation of a thing or a thing itself, but an apophatic motion, the seeing of the impossibility of seeing. This invisible image is also a means of transreferentiality and can manifest through polyvocality, which polyvocality, I think, is apophatic because it enables a rewriting of the self and other, a turning away or a refusal of the singular subject's perspective. So along those lines, another poem I would consider one of my better ones because I'm still interested in it, because I still don't understand it. It's called The Shadow Poems, and it's a long sequence. I won't read it all to you. I'll read like a little snippet. But The Shadow Poems is an example of this polyvocal palimpsestic sequence that attempts to see through a language that conceals to learn insight into what has been made invisible. For the shadow poem, I worked with a range of texts written from 1527 to 1828 about Muskogee people, land, and history, navigating through what these texts conceal of our land, people, culture, story, and language. So I'd lifted all this material that had surfed through erasures that I did from these 7 journals, they were big journals and really horribly written, like really boring. And I typed it all into a 16-page document because 16 felt like a good number for me. I then cut each page into 4 and 4 again, and I rearranged these 256 pieces into 16 new pages, and then I sewed them together with tape to make what I was calling quilts. So with these 16 new quilts of text fragments, I wrote 16 poems, and each poem corresponds to one quilt and only uses words that exist on its corresponding page. So this constraint helped me to make new sense and sound to these words and to liberate them from their authors, their time, their context, their intention, and their location. And what emerged was a sequence of voices, whose voices I did not know and still only peripherally hear. And I'll read just 3 short pieces from this sequence. But the fact that I'm still trying to understand these voices is why I'm still interested in this poem. I am told heaven is already visible in the white woods, but I see nothing. The river was impassable for days. Encamped near a fish-bitten bank, I found a violin, my skull's brass rattle, cracked water moccasin yellowed from the sun. I had rendered my provisions, 2 rows of teeth, a small knot of fire, sugar, keg, hatchet, grass. To sleep in the pines, let slip my raft, as if from the ribs of a woman whose name I forgot and regretted ever since. The messenger follows its own devices, guided by fragrance of grass, laced through endless blazes. I saw nothing, a burnt-out passage, deserted houses, barren stone, a series of flame-fringed ridges, trackless geography awash in pitch. What conceit, drawn with an American camera. The scenery of another epoch's slender pines seemed to rest as on a robe of marten skins. And this one had a bunch of voices in it. That's all I know about it. Multiple voices in this one. Exhausted from the violent order of hours, we took shelter in the country of Kusa, a deserted village with thin deer, flint roads. We learned to navigate painted margins, fence the fields, plant stones, make of nothing bread enough. Did not resist the music of the swamp, old dances raising the river's black dress, her perfumed cane, rum-skinned fruit. In the mouth of March, we were swimming in flowers and lived in this manner, without men or wars, on the left banks of the earth. I'll stop there so we can hear from Eduardo. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Can everybody hear me? Thank you, Carl and Erin, for putting this anthology together. When I was asked to select my personal best, quote unquote, for this anthology, I kept returning to poems that refused to transcribe experience. Poems that used and centered the imagination and persona. I found myself veering away from memory-rich poems. I think I moved toward the persona and the surreal, the use of the imagination, because it transformed experience by making unexpected connections and by taking leaps that are surprising and, most importantly, emotive. I'm gonna read two poems I was considering for this anthology, then read the third poem that's in the anthology and the little prose piece that is published right aside to it. I'm one of those poets that's terrified of the sentence. So when I was asked to write this prose piece, I was in my desk in my office counting down the words. I think it was a 500-word minimum, and I was like at 489, 490, 491, and those last 5 words were the hardest. So here's a poem that centers the imagination, but it's a poem about unrequited love, but it takes a different approach to make that kind of visible, emotionally resonant on the page. It's the title poem of my second book, Guillotine. The scorpions always arrive at dawn. Gently, their pincers touch the cuts on my lips. I clutch the edges of the mattress, stare at the mirrored ceiling. My mouth opens, but no sound staggers out. The scorpions, dark green, dank, reach in, pull out the razor blade under my tongue. 2 scorpions, a razor blade, slowly, in unison, without letting go of the metal. They move, a little guillotine making its way down my body. I remember dragging my thumb through his beard, coppery and difficult. The scorpions pause, tilt the blade, a threat, a reminder. It's my task to stop yearning for as long as it takes them to carry a blade across my skin. My thoughts swerve from monsoon storms to accordions to pecan groves. The little guillotine starts moving again. I begin to sense the enormity of my body, the blade high in the air for now. The second poem from Guillotine is a persona poem, a Mexican immigrant moving through the Sonoran Desert to where I was born and raised in southern Arizona, thinking about his children. Far from highways, I flicker, gold of the whispering gasoline. If I pinch her nipples too hard, no joy for her, no joy for me. So I practice on ticks, press them just so they give, but do not burst. Beneath my boots, thistle and puncture vine. A wild horse asleep on all fours, its shadow still grazing. My lips, black meat, my tongue, black meat. In my backpack, sardine tins, saltines, and a few cough drops. The moon is my library. There's a glacier inside a grain of salt. Do you understand? I'm sorry. My Albanian isn't very good. Tremble if God forgets you. Tremble if God remembers you. Out of clay, I shape sparrows. I glaze their bills and claws. I give them names like Gossamer, Inglenook, Lagoon. She bathed a trumpet in milk. Her tenderness acoustic and plural. Her pupils perched in all that green. There's nudity around the corner, bones cracked and iridescent. Sometimes a rain so hard, even the moon puts on a raincoat. Zinc raz, zinc jazz. I notch my arms, I notch my thighs. 5, 6 days, I score my skin, but not the back of my knees. 2 ovals, 2 portraits. My son at 10, his eyes ablaze. My son at 1, his eyes shut. Once I dressed him in burlap. Once bicycles and marbles. Once I tore rain out of a parable to strike down his thirst. I want to read the poem that's in the anthology and the prose piece that took me way too long to write. That's alongside of it. This poem is titled, and it's in my first book, Slow Lightning. It's titled Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome. I approach a harp abandoned in a harvested field. A deer leaps out of the brush and follows me in the rain. A scarlet snake wound in its dark antlers. My fingers curled around a shard of glass. It's like holding the hand of a child. I'll cut the harp strings for my mandolin, use the frame as a window in a chapel yet to be built. I'll scrape off its blue lacquer, melt the flakes down with a candle and ladle, and paint the inner curve of my soup bowl. The deer passes me. I lower my head, stick out my tongue to taste the honey smeared on its hind leg. In the field center, I crouch near a boulder engraved with a number and stare at a gazelle's blue ghost, the rain falling through it. This prose piece is titled, I Remember David Lawrence Kirby. I came of age in the 1980s during the AIDS pandemic in this country. As my brown body began to shimmer with desire, I watched the bodies of gay men in magazines, on the nightly news, in movies, wither, then disappear. Bullies in elementary school delighted, like demented atoms, in naming me, fag, homo. I knew I wasn't those words. The words that truly described me were softer, more powerful. This was the first time I intuited words cast more than one shadow. I knew I was gay, but I thought I could keep the fact to myself, un secreto. It was never a secret. It was visible to others. I was terribly lonely inside the secret. It was like trudging up and down a very narrow hallway. I couldn't reach out to others. I couldn't let in my parents, my teachers, so I kept scouring the TV guide for shows featuring gay men, which during the Reagan years meant illness and death. Men struck down by an early frost. Men who refused to stop loving each other. Men with normal hearts. and purple skin. In 7th grade, I couldn't sleep. In the dark, I tackled the questions my mind reeled out. If I got AIDS, how would my parents react? What word would my father utter first? Would they kick me out of the house? If so, where would I live? In a cotton field, in the desert? How quickly does the body rot in a coffin? These questions, these nightly interrogations, are one of the reasons I'm a poet. The fear of a virus spurred my imagination. I spent countless hours inventing scenarios, conjuring up vivid imagery. I've never forgotten a series of photographs of a gone-to-gay man surrounded by his family. In one photograph, his father gently cradles his head at the moment of death. I spent over 9 years working on my first book of poems. I desperately wanted to include poems about fearing desire, equating queerness with death, overeating because skinniness was a symptom of infection, and checking the skin above my ankles for purple patches after each shower. I wanted to include a poem about my first kiss. I closed my eyes like the women on television, how his lips were chapped, fleshy, but each draft felt inert. After 5 years or so, I realized why the poems weren't working. I was forcing language into specific memories, into narrow containers. Inside these containers, language didn't have any room to veer into the unexpected. If memory is a constriction, how would I be able to write about growing up during the AIDS epidemic? But asking that question brought me back to the nights where scenario after scenario rattled in my skull. My body and my mind were well acquainted with these narratives. There was no surprise for me in those memories. Not only were the memories familiar, but my interrogations were also familiar. To quote Robert Hayden, I had to find another angle of ascent. The way skyward was language itself. Specifically, the term acquired immune deficiency syndrome. I forced myself to dwell with the words, to hear the music, to find interesting possibilities inside the term. One day, an image popped into my head, words vibrating like strings. A few weeks later, the first lines of a poem sprang forth. I approach a harp abandoned in a harvested field. Gracias.
I think they told us these are just going to be on now, right? Ooh, like magic. They just turned on. Thank you all. I wish actually we just kept reading poems because you guys sounded wonderful, and thank you so much for doing that. Oh, mask. So we're just going to talk for a little bit about whatever comes to my mind. Who knows what it'll be? And talk a little bit about how the anthology, why the anthology came into being, why Carl Phillips was my co-editor in this. Carl and I have known each other for 100 years. He wishes he could be here, but he has a medical condition that doesn't allow him to be around large groups of writers. So I'm here representing, since I don't need an EpiPen for it. But one of the things I was curious about as you guys were talking, I will also admit every fourth word you said, I couldn't actually hear. So if I'm asking you things that you already answered, just like give me a sign of some sort. Were you having trouble hearing?
Yeah.
Okay, it wasn't just
But
me.
you guys could hear us, right? Yeah, see?
Okay, well, you'll let me know if I'm repeating what they already said then. But one of the things I was curious about is Carl Phillips and I took it as a kind of article of faith that there's real value in centering the maker, right? And we definitely use that word on purpose, right? Makers on their poems that matter most. I'm wondering how you guys feel, because everyone here is not just a writer but also a teacher. I'm wondering how you feel about a book that really sort of asserts the idea that the maker's voice, because I can also hear all the critics, like my background is in theory and I know all of the things that other people might say. You know, because authors are dead. I don't know if you know that or not. Happened some time ago. How do you feel about this idea of centering the maker in a book like this?
Well, I like it because I don't know if any of you have had the experience of, like, if you've written a body of work, there might be like one poem that everybody's like, oh my God, I love that poem. And sometimes you're like, really? That poem? How come not this other poem? And what about that poem? Or what about that poem that is like for me, it was like this technical achievement. And it's like, who cares, the reader says, I want to do this. So what I liked about this assignment was subverting that. You don't, as a maker, once you throw the poem out into the world, you don't have any control over what happens to it. And it's fascinating to see what readers respond to. But I liked being able to mull this. And I realized all of my own choices for this were about working form. It was about technique. And so often in anthologies, when form is like the least thing, unless it's like anthology of sonnets, this kind of thing. So I appreciated it.
So I'm just wondering if we're getting, is this the music that plays us off?
I'm hearing like a Sousa march going on.
Is the hook going to come out in a second? Can you all hear this music too, or is it just us? Okay. So it's just in my head.
It's the celestial music.
Yeah, we're getting this like weird
What music?
music going on over here.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Who,
There's no
there's
music.
No, I love that you phrased it this way and talked about form, because I was thinking about, Erin, your original question. This is something that popped up quite a bit with Gwendolyn Brooks, and she would talk about it because everybody knew We Real Cool, and she would say in readings, I wrote other poems. And I'm going to read some of those too, but you might have heard this poem, Real Cool. So it's like this great gift to have anything that anyone is reading ever, or is familiar with as a poet. And then there's another part of it, which is like, also, I hope that there's a contrasting and sometimes competing body of verse around it that you might follow to get to other ideas.
When I was an undergrad at Arizona State University and first started writing poetry seriously, I by chance also started reading at the same time interviews with writers and poets. And that was very instructive to me. And this anthology does a very similar thing, I think. It shows you, right, that there are many ways to write a poem, right, to interrogate language. And also shows you there are many ways to think about language and to be a poet in the world, right? So I think this anthology, like those interviews that I first read as an undergrad, give you permission, right, to follow your own kind of path, right, to choose your own questions you want to explore on the page. I think that's one of the great gifts of the anthology.
I think it cancels out that question that a lot of people have. What is the poem about? And people like, I love that poem, but I'm not sure I understand it. What is it about? And I love this anthology because you can say, oh, you can read an essay by this poet who wrote about a poem that they wrote, and realize that the aboutness is not, the poem's life evolves and lives and transforms through the poem and is always out of the field of aboutness anyway. So I think that's what this anthology does.
That's an excellent answer. Pardon me. My next question for you, I realize you didn't run any of these questions past you, but it's just pass-fail, there's no grade. Was there anything, and Dana touched on this, I think, in her essay, but was there anything that really genuinely surprised you going back? I mean, in the process of having to, because it's one of those terrible desert island questions, right? Like, you only get to pick one poem that represents the fullness of you as an artist, right? It's like you only get to take one song to a desert island, right? What did you find out about your poem that you didn't know going into the process, if anything?
I just think I didn't realize that I was trying to do so many things at once, and sometimes succeeding and sometimes failing in that. But it was the poem that for me seemed the most, it touched the things I was talking about before. That there's a narrative here, and there's a kind of music that I'm interested in, and it was the one place where I found that they all seemed to be hitting in a way that I'd hoped they would be. Does I mean, like even the idea of best was complicated because it's my best effort, not my best poem, maybe, And so that was the place where I was trying my hardest at a thing. And so for me, that there's a satisfaction, even if it's not working in all of the, in all the ways that I might want to, and all the octaves that I would hope to hit. It's trying to do those things. And I didn't realize that I was giving myself a ribbon for, just trying, like a participation.
Participation trophy. I'd say it's a lot more than that. I will say to the audience, when Carl and I came up with this like snappy title, and I was really proud of it. And when we sent this out to invite people to participate, the knots that we tied people into with the word best, and understandably, right? Like personal best, like what a terrible thing to ask somebody. Do you know what I mean? But I have to admit, sort of sadistically, it was fun watching all of the poets wrangle with like, well, I'm not going to really say best. And a lot of people have to like take this up in the essays about needing to qualify that word. I just thought it was great marketing. But the spirit was there too. What were you going to say, Dana?
I was going to say what surprised me was that this poem is a mix of verse and prose. And I wrote it almost 20 years ago. And I just finished a book that is really a mix of verse and prose, my latest book. And it was just wild to like go back to that poem that's over 20 years old and be like, oh, it was right there then. And then actually it made me go back through all 5 of my books and see that there's always been a toggle between verse and prose as each book develops. And I was really fascinated by that because, friends, all I'm doing right now is writing prose. So I know, sorry, or maybe happy. So that was it was like doing personal excavation, and learning something about myself through having to relook at this poem that was 20 years old with the eyes that I have now and be like, oh, I was always doing this in different ways. So, yeah.
As a poet who's thinking and beginning the work on the 3rd book, going back through my first 2 books, I just saw the limitations of the work, which is, for me, is a good thing to spur and to challenge myself. So looking at the first 2 books, maybe a crutch reliance on imagery, maybe an use of that lyrical flourish at the end. So for me, it was helpful to see my patterns in the first 2 books, and maybe hopefully find a way to break those patterns in a way that I find interesting and resonant in the next book. So it was helpful for me to just look backward to see where I can go in the future.
Okay, I like your pattern, so.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I think this would be a good exercise for everybody to do. I was so terrified by it that I said, I'm just going to treat it like a poem and just choose what poem can I think of right now that I actually enjoy reading. And the first one that came to mind that I think I like reading that poem was the one that I chose. And so I thought, okay, I'll just start with the image, which is what I do with poetry. And so I started with one, and then that's how my writing about it came about. So as I was thinking, as poets, we could all write in conversation with our poems. And doing this made me think, oh, I'd like to try and do that with other poems too, and treat each one as a personal best, if possible. Yeah.
I mean, the total hypocrisy of this, Carl and I start most days with a very snarky text thread to get the day going. And so every once in a while we'll say, because we didn't put ourselves in the anthology because we're not going to do that. but every once in a while, we never, because when we put this together, Carl was like, well, what would you pick? And I was like, oh, I don't know. I'll have to think about that. I was like, what will you pick? And he was like, I have no idea. So every once in a while in our text things, he's like, did you ever think of a poem? And I'm like, no. And it was a pretty, we realized after the fact how difficult an assignment it was, because it's like, I don't know, it's like choosing, for me, it's like choosing between a basket of sad little abandoned kittens or something, you know what I mean? How can I let any of them go? I just wondered if there were people in the audience at this point that had any, we're getting close to the end, and I don't want to talk the entire time all by myself. Did you have questions for people on the panel at all?
While we're trying to get that together, I just wanted to mention, I'm thinking about this idea of writing for each poem, which I think is lovely. And I have a friend and former student in here, Sully, who can attest to this, that in workshop, I have all of the writers write an aesthetic statement about the poem they turn in, which is a very shortened version of what we ended up doing for this anthology. It's like, you think about the work as you're doing it, and it's a lot easier to, sort of contextualize it across the schema of your art.
I would really hate that.
yeah, some of them did too. But by the end of it, they were writing really beautiful prose, which is not something that I would say about myself, which is why I didn't read the essay. I summarized it for you all.
I honestly, I was impressed by the prose in there. We were so surprised because we had no idea. It's asking poets to write prose. It was just, again, an act of faith that it would all come together. And y'all are good prose writers too. Put the other guys out of business. We don't have to do a Q&A if you would rather not. I'm surprised there's nobody who has a question. Aha, I knew you were out there. Go ahead.
Yes.
Oh, if you,
Yeah.
no.
I think they need it for the closed captioning.
Now they're bringing you the mic. Now you've done it. We can't see you at all either, by the way.
Oh, wait, it's not on.
Psych.
Yeah,
I did not. Oh, whoa.
There you go.
Okay. Jennifer, I get your point about the echo being a poem of its own sort, and this is really confusing. But I was just wondering, thank you for this wonderful conversation. I was just wondering if this assignment, as you put it, it feels like a very out-of-body experience almost, as if you have to sort of be your own audience and step out of the role of the maker as well as be the maker. I mean, it feels like a very disorienting assignment, and I wonder how it felt to be in that double position of both maker and audience. And I was wondering if you'd like to reflect on that. I don't know if you have words on that.
No, I love that question because I definitely believe poems are autonomous creatures, and my job as a writer is to just be like, okay, come through me, I'll try and help you be. So for me, I always feel like the poem and I are not exactly the same, and I don't even necessarily feel like I wrote it. I feel like it's a co-created thing. So to have to step back and look at the poem and start thinking about personal best or writing an essay about it wasn't hard because of my general sense that the poem is separate and it's relational. It's not me doing it's like poem and I speaking and creating that thing on the page.
I also think for me, writing the essay was creating something. And so I found myself so focused on trying to write an essay that I also liked that it became another remove. You know, I was writing about what I thought about crafting this poem, but I was also quite focused on crafting this essay. So just in the same way that a poem is, I think, a translation of an experience that we can't describe, the craft essay became a kind of translation of a poem that I can't describe. So it was a fun thing to do. It was disorienting. I liked that about it.
Maybe I'm the only person that didn't have a hard time with it. Only because it gave me an opportunity to talk about Lucille Clifton and Robert Hayden and the people who made it possible to write the poem. So it's much more about that lineage that I was trying to talk about. And it just like went through like, oh, hey, this is great. Listen, let me tell you, this poem was inspired by and made possible by this group of other poets and musicians and artists. And let me tell you about them in case you don't know yet.
There was another question? Go ahead. Wish I could see you.
Hi, I just wanted to say this was a great panel, and I wanted to ask about, since you've been talking about this conversation of what constitutes personal best, to what degree do you think there's a difference between what you feel is the personal best and what feels like an experiment with like I and working with that I to create your best and like creating a sort of magnum opus? Like what maybe makes me think of that question of like, it's because of, I believe it was Adrian brought up how he felt these milestones, like he felt he was found something, a new way to sing or create music. It's like, I want to know, like, does that feel for you? What is that, does that connect to like the difference between your best, your just general work, and what you might consider your worst, if there is a worst?
Thank you for that question. I think it's important to recognize that this is always a work in progress, right? And what I thought was going to be the greatest thing I ever wrote in my life 15 years ago was not one of the poems I read. You know what I mean? It's like so much of this is tied to our own relationship with language, who we are in that moment, the way we become conduits for things. All of those play together at the same time. I have to believe that the best thing I've written is still waiting for me to figure it out. Because otherwise, all I'm doing is writing the same poem, like, you know, getting like tickets from a skee ball game or something. You know, once you figure out how to do it, then that's where you are. I have to believe that there's another version of this that includes me learning a different kind of language for poems, includes new discoveries in other ways. And when I can get all of that together in one thing, then maybe I'll have that. I mean, I don't know if you all feel differently about it, but yeah. So catch me when I'm like 80. And hopefully the day before I've written my best.
Well, that's right. In the act of writing, it's like, this is genius. This is the most amazing thing I've ever done, you know, and then a month later, it's like, no.
The honeymoon just gets shorter and shorter, doesn't it?
Yeah, like 2 minutes later.
Yeah. I think we're pretty close to being at time. Yes? Yeah. Okay. Thank you all so much for coming today and for enjoying. I feel very proud of my panel. And
Thank you for joining us in this cavernous room.
I wish we could see you. Maybe we will when we get off stage. And are they going to be able to sign things?
Yeah, come buy anthologies.
Just give us a couple minutes for everyone to get out there, and feel free to come and buy books and have them signed.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.